Hey everybody, my name is Mike Gaudette and welcome back to another installment of Top 5 Albums, the series where I walk you through my 5 favorite albums from every year. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the year 1974, another awesome year for music, and now as we get closer to the midpoint of the 70s, we're going to start seeing more and more changes continue to happen with the further expansion of technology and bands and artists continuing to branch out into new and uncharted territories in all different styles of music. And after looking back at the 5 albums that I picked for today's episode, I think it makes it really clear that this was just an incredible year for music exploration. So without further ado, here are my top 5 favorite albums of 1974, starting with number 5. Alright, coming in at number 5 is Apostrophe by Frank Zappa, a legendary record to come from this very groundbreaking and innovative songwriter, and in my opinion, one of the best albums of his discography. And in my episode for 1973, his previous album, Overnight Sensation, had also made my top 5 list. And this album follows a similar trajectory with the experimental prog rock, jazz fusion sort of hybrid, with all of the crazy and incredibly complicated writing styles of Frank Zappa. The album is 9 tracks long, with side 1 being 5 songs that are loosely connected together and form a suite. And the album opens up with a track that perfectly encapsulates Frank Zappa's very advanced sense of musicality, combined with his very unique sense of humor on track 1, which is titled Don't Eat the Yellow Snow. And this song is very complex from both a rhythmic and a melodic perspective, with the 7/4 time signature and all of the really intricate little single note lines that respond to the vocal parts. And then for the remainder of side 1, it is just one incredible song after the other, with the tracks flowing into each other very seamlessly, with so many great instrumental solos, with my personal favorites being Nanook Rubs It and St. Alfonso's Pancake Breakfast, which has one of my all-time favorite instrumental sections of any Frank Zappa song. So complicated and so many interesting melodic and harmonic movements going on all throughout it. And side 1 wraps up beautifully with Cosmic Debris, which is a classic Frank Zappa song and has a really catchy chorus. And as far as the instrumentation goes, I really love the prevalence of the vibraphone all throughout this record. It's featured pretty heavily on most of these tracks, and I think it does a great job of adding to that humorous, comical sort of mood that a lot of these tracks give off. Side 2 then features 4 more tracks with a couple of guest features like drummer Jim Gordon and bassist Jack Bruce, although he claims that he didn't play or co-write on any of the songs on this record, even though he is credited on it, so that is somewhat of a mystery surrounding this album. My 2 personal favorite tracks on side 2 would be Uncle Remus, which has some of my favorite piano work of any Frank Zappa song and is done beautifully by George Duke, and I also really love the closing track, Stinkfoot, wrapping the album up on a more comical note and also showcasing some very solid Frank Zappa guitar solos. So I think this album is a very solid batch of tracks, and it's a really easy listen at only about 32 minutes in length. The songs on side 1 all flow into each other very nicely, and then we get another solid 4 tracks on side 2, while also showcasing some more of Frank Zappa's guitar playing, which is very nice. And this would probably go down as my second favorite Zappa album. I do like Overnight Sensation a little bit more, but this is definitely a very close second. So that is my number 5 album. Now on to number 4. Coming in at number 4 is Autobahn by Kraftwerk, an incredible album to come out of this German electronic group. This was their 4th studio album and the first record where you really get a taste of their electronic pop side, which is the style that they would be most well known for. We have tons of different synth sounds, drum machines, and a couple of acoustic instruments like flute, violin, and guitar all combined together so beautifully. The album is 5 tracks long, and it's mostly centered around the theme of driving on Germany's Autobahn, and the music is meant to reflect that. The entirety of side 1 consists of the almost 23-minute long title track, which is my personal favorite song from this album and the most perfect way that they could have opened this record in my opinion. Everything about this song is just so engaging and the 22 minutes just fly right by. There is so much depth to this song. It's got beautiful and catchy melodies, tasteful and very innovative synth sounds and sequences, feel-good grooves, and nice little vocal parts here and there. Definitely a track that would make my favorite Kraftwerk song list. Side 2 then has 4 more tracks with a couple of twists and turns thrown in. Some songs are more experimental, while others are on that more electronic pop side with more melodic components to them. My personal favorite of side 2 would be the track Comet Melody 2. I love the melodies on that track, and in general I think they did a really great job of combining the more electronic poppy sides of their new sound with some of the more experimental elements that we had heard on their previous 3 albums, which are much different stylistically from where they would go from this record and onward. And for 1974, this is clearly a groundbreaking album that was just so ahead of its time and just utilizing so much new technology and getting so many new amazing synth sounds. And it really opened the door for a lot of other groups to continue to build off of and explore in that similar stylistic territory. And I'm a huge Kraftwerk fan. If I was ranking their discography, this one would go down as my 3rd favorite Kraftwerk album. And I have an entire video where I go through all of the Kraftwerk studio albums and rank them. And if you're interested in checking that out, you can find the tier list playlist, which will be linked in the comments and the description, so be sure to check that out. And yeah, just an incredible and very innovative album to come out of 1974. So that is my number 4. Now on to number 3. Okay, coming in at number 3 is Todd by Todd Rundgren, a standout album from Todd Rundgren's very large discography, and also a record that for me personally would make my top 5 favorite double albums list. On Todd's previous record, he had started veering into more psychedelic territories, and this album is very much a continuation on that sort of style, with a very wide range of different types of sounds and instrumentations, using tons of different synthesizers, organ, clavinet, as well as saxophone, harpsichord, trumpet, and trombone on select individual tracks. And not only is Todd Rundgren an amazing guitarist, songwriter, and arranger, but he's also an incredible producer as well. His production all throughout this record is absolutely amazing. To me, this is one of those double albums that does not feel like it drags at any point. It just goes from one side to the next very seamlessly and is a very easy listen. From a song perspective, I really love the pacing. It's a very easy listen for a double album, and it's got great contrasting moods from track to track, ranging from psychedelic to humorous to mellow and beautiful and everything in between. There's also a nice handful of instrumental tracks that do a great job of contrasting the vocal songs, and they serve as a great palette for Todd to develop all of these amazing sounds and experimentations with the technology that was available at that time. And on some of these tracks and the types of synth sounds that Todd was using, they produce this very colorful and almost cartoonish sort of mood, which I find very interesting, and I really like it a lot. And this is a record that can be enjoyed in its entirety, or you can listen to it for really incredible individual Todd Rundgren songs like A Dream Goes On Forever, which is a classic and one of my favorite songs on here. A couple of my other favorite vocal tracks on here would be Useless Begging, I Think You Know, Is That Love, and the closing track, Sons of 1984, which wraps up the album so beautifully with this really full-sounding choir. A great closer to an incredible album. For the instrumental tracks, hands down my number 1 favorite would be Sidewalk Cafe. This song just puts me in such a vibe when I listen to it, and like I had said before, those cartoonish, really colorful sorts of elements, I think this song is a perfect example of that, and I just love it so much. And like I said, when it comes to double albums, this one would easily make my top 5 favorites. And another one that I think is a standout record from Todd Rundgren's discography. I also did a video ranking all of his studio albums as well, so if you're interested in that, that will be in the tier list playlist as well, which is linked in the comments and the description. And just another amazing and very innovative album to come out of 1974. So that is my number 3. Now on to number 2. Okay, coming in at number 2 is Todd Rundgren's Utopia. This is the incredible debut album from the prog rock band Utopia, which obviously features Todd Rundgren, and as you can see, he released some of my favorite music of the year 1974. This is an amazing album with so much depth to it, and not only is it one of my favorite records of 1974, but it would also make my list of top 5 favorite prog rock albums as well. In this initial formation of Utopia, it was a 6-piece group with 3 keyboards, guitar, bass, and drums. And the album consists of 4 tracks, which are all on the longer side, with only one of them being under 10 minutes in length. Compositionally, every song on here is very engaging with a lot of different surprising elements, never knowing what twists and turns these tracks are going to take. From a technical standpoint, every musician is being featured very nicely, and we really get to hear Todd Rundgren stretch out some more with his guitar playing, which is a nice contrast to the solo albums that he had released up to this point, where we don't hear as many longer solos and stuff like that. So I also really appreciate that element of this record, because I think Todd Rundgren is a pretty underrated guitar player. I love the way that they mix and weave in and out of the instrumental sections and the vocal sections. I think, again, it makes for a very engaging listen that's surprising and really keeps you on the edge of your seat. And the album opens up with the only live track on here, which is titled Utopia. And I do not think they could have opened the album up with a better song. I remember when I first put this album on, I was just completely engaged right from the opening notes, and they just had me hooked. I love it so much. It's my favorite song on here, and a perfect way to bring the album in. The next track is titled Freak Parade, which again really keeps you on the edge of your seat and is a great follow-up to the opening song and does a great job of showcasing the impressive chops of all of the different musicians in this group. And then track 3, titled Freedom Fighters, is in my opinion the most perfectly placed track. This is the one that is on the shorter side in comparison to the remainder of the songs on here. And this one still has prog elements to it, but it also has some more similarities to the later Utopia sound, where they would kind of veer off a bit from the more heavy prog sorts of elements and have more vocal centered tracks that take on some poppy flavors. And this song is the closest that we get to that side of Utopia, and I think it was the perfect song to contrast the longer, more progressive elements of this record. And it's the perfect track to set up the final 30-minute blowout song, which is titled The Icon. An absolutely incredible song with so much adventure and surprise, mixing together every mood that Utopia is able to achieve, with some more technical and choppy parts, some groovy elements, and some down-tempo, spacey, atmospheric sorts of vibes as well. And again, I think the vocal placement throughout this is very effective and really makes the 30 minutes go by like nothing. An amazing and adventurous song that wraps up this album perfectly and is a perfect example of a very long song that really keeps your attention all the way throughout, and could not be a better conclusion to this incredible debut album from Utopia. So that is my number 2 album, and now for the grand reveal, here is my number 1 favorite album of 1974. Alright, coming in as my number 1 favorite album of 1974, we've got Rock Bottom by Robert Wyatt, a masterpiece of an album that not only delivers very beautiful and intense emotional music, but also has a very fascinating and tragic story behind it. In the late 60s and early 70s, Robert Wyatt was primarily known as a drummer for the bands Soft Machine and Matching Mole, and he would also dabble in a little bit of singing, and that was the trajectory that he had planned to follow. But unfortunately, in 1973, he was at a party with his wife, and he was very drunk, and he would actually end up falling out of a 4th floor window, which would result in him being paralyzed from the waist down, and he's been in a wheelchair ever since. And obviously, he was no longer able to be a drummer, which resulted in him changing his approach to songwriting. And while he was recovering in the hospital from this accident, he would go into the visitors area and start messing around on the piano, and he started working out some songs that he had recently written on a trip to Venice with his wife, obviously before the accident, and those songs would eventually culminate into this album. And although these songs were written prior to his accident, there is no doubt that because of the circumstances that he had been in from that point on, it definitely created a shift in the way that he approached songwriting. And although it was written under very unfortunate circumstances, I think it resulted in the best album of 1974 and the best album of Robert Wyatt's entire discography. The mood of this album is very spacey at times, with a lot of dark and intense moments, but there's also a theme of love that's happening throughout it as well, and is very much a commentary on his love and affection for his wife, Alfie. And in terms of Robert Wyatt's compositional style, there is always something surprising coming around the corner, lots of colorful and unorthodox chord movements. Robert is never afraid to use more dissonant chord voicings or tense and dissonant harmonies that can be off-putting to some people's ears, but I find it so cool and I really love the effect that it produces. The instrumentations on this are beautiful. We've got some amazing production from Nick Mason of Pink Floyd, which is a fun little fact about this record, and you can definitely hear some of those spacey and psychedelic elements that we get in the Pink Floyd sound present on this record as well. The album is 6 tracks long and almost 40 minutes in length, and throughout this track listing, they do not waste one single moment. This is a record that can really take you into another dimension and can be a very intense experience when you listen to it from front to back. And this is the type of album that I would say is an acquired taste. It might not be for everybody, but for me and the type of music listener that I am, I absolutely love everything that's going on all throughout this. I love when I listen to a record and it takes you through a really intense and emotional journey, and when it comes to having that type of experience listening to an album, I think this is one of the best examples of that. The 6 tracks on here are all incredibly unique and all serve a very important function in the album and what types of emotions they are trying to convey. You go through the full palette of different emotions that Robert Wyatt had been experiencing at that time, with the intensity, the sadness, the love, the hopefulness, and everything in between that. Of the 6 songs on here, my personal 2 favorites are the opening 2 tracks, but like I said, I love every single track on here. I do not think they wasted a single moment, and I would consider this to be a 10 out of 10 record, and an album that was a clear turning point for Robert Wyatt and the songwriting trajectory that he would take on future albums. And because of the intensity and the unfortunate circumstances surrounding how this album got made, I think it just adds even more power and intensity to this incredible album, and this would go down as my number 1 favorite album of 1974. So that's it for today's video. So to recap, at number 5 we had Apostrophe by Frank Zappa. At number 4 we had Autobahn by Kraftwerk. At number 3 we had Todd by Todd Rundgren. At number 2 we had Todd Rundgren's Utopia by Utopia. And number 1 was Rock Bottom by Robert Wyatt. If you haven't heard any of these albums and you check them out, please let me know what you think in the comments, and please let me know what your top 5 favorite albums are in the comments. I would love to see your lists. Alright, that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for my top 5 favorite albums of 1975. I'll see you then. Take care.